So here is part 2 of the tutorial on building this simple Space Invaders style game. Part 1 used concepts that we already had from the class and just adapted them to a game format. In this part, we'll introduce the new concept of using custom attributes as variables to keep track of things in the game that we might not necessarily be able to see, such as we use the redness of the bad guy as a variable. The bad guy's life was reduced each time a bullet hit it, and that was represented by a change in color, and also the color attribute kept track of how many hits there were, so that when the redness dropped to 0, the bad guy was destroyed. But score is more complicated for a couple of reasons. One, score does not belong to any particular actor. Score belongs to the entire game, because it's the bullet's collision with the bad guy and the bad guy's destruction that causes change in the score. So it doesn't make sense for score to be an attribute of the good guy. It doesn't make sense for score to be an attribute of the bullet because the bullet is destroyed. It similarly doesn't make sense for the score to be an attribute of the bad guy because the bad guy is also destroyed. It could be an attribute of game functions, but game functions isn't really involved in the actual mechanics of shooting the bad guy. The game functions is neither the bad guy nor the bullet. So this puts us in the situation of needing an attribute that doesn't belong to any particular actor. And fortunately, there's a whole pane dedicated to that. So we're creating a game-level attribute, or what we'll call a global attribute, or the same term as a global variable. And to do that, we click on the Attributes tab, click the plus button to create an attribute. So let's look at the various attribute types. Boolean we've talked a lot about. Boolean is the classic computer 1 and 0, where 1 represents true or yes, 0 represents no or false. Text is a way to store words in an attribute. Integer is what we want for score. Integer is a number with no decimal or fractional component. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 0, -1, -2, -3, those are all integers. Real numbers are numbers with decimal components. So for instance, when we're dealing with colors, we're dealing with colors of 0.9, 0.5, 0.3. Those are real numbers. Angles are from 0 to 360 degrees, and angle wraps around, so that 370 degrees is the same as 10 degrees. And index we're not going to look at in this class. So we're going to create an integer attribute, and we can double click it to name it, and we'll call it score. And I like to put my attributes in all caps so I know that I made them. Every time I see an attribute that's in all caps, I'm like, oh, that's one of mine. That helps you separate them from all of these other attributes that you probably aren't going to be using. In any given game or project, you're only going to be using a few attributes as variables, and it's handy to be able to quickly pick those out. So I've created score, and now we have to look at when the score changes. Well, the score changes when the bad guy is destroyed. So here's our destruction rule. And between the first and second tutorial, I went in and added some titles to these rules and behaviors so that they're a little bit easier to see, and you should do that in your own projects as well. So in addition to destroying the actor, we want to increase the score when the bad guy is destroyed. And that's our regular change attribute behavior. And notice I'm putting that before destroy. GameSalad reads from top to bottom, so this will mean right before it's destroyed, it will change the score attribute of the game. So let's say that the game's score increases by 10 points. So game score, the new game score, will be the old game score plus 10. And that's going to work. It's going to be changing every time we destroy a bad guy, but we're not actually displaying that score anywhere. So it's a fully functional scorekeeper that we've just built. Now we need to show that score on the screen. And that's a great thing for game functions to do, because game functions, as we know, is kind of a catch-all place to put behaviors and rules that don't really belong to any particular actor. For instance, we use game functions to spawn the bad guy because we can't have the bad guy spawn itself. Well, we could, but that would be a different type of way of bringing bad guys onto the scene if bad guys spawned more bad guys. We want something that's kind of outside of the game to be spawning these every 2 seconds, so we use game functions. And it's also a great way to write messages onto the screen. And for that, we're introducing the display text behavior, and the default is hello world, which is there's just something in there to test with, because we want to see, well, where are we going to put this score on the screen? Let's put it 100 pixels to the right of game functions and 300 pixels below, and we want to make sure to color it white so we can see it against the black background, or whatever color you like. And let's see where that goes. Hello world, it's right there. And it's centered. If we were to do left justified text, we'll see exactly where our score is going to display. That's a good place for it. So instead of hello world, I'm actually going to display the game's score, and there is my score attribute, and I can tell I created it because it's in all capital letters. And at the beginning of the game, the score is 0, and every time I do in a bad guy, the score goes up by 10 points. Wonderful. And it feels like a little bit too close to the edge and maybe a little bit too high, so we can adjust that. I'll put it 120 pixels to the right of game functions and 320 pixels below. And there, now I like where it is. My good guy runs into it a little bit, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about that. So now we have scorekeeping. The other game level attribute or global variable that we looked at was one that allows us to limit how many bullets are on the screen at the same time. And what we did there is we went to our game level attributes and created a new one, and this time it's a Boolean, either a true or false. And we called it can shoot. And at the beginning of the game we want can shoot to be true, so we check it here. That means at the beginning of the game can shoot is true. So what are the conditions that make can shoot false? Well, as soon as we shoot, we can't shoot immediately again. So if I look at my good guy, in addition to spawning the bullet actor, I can also change attribute. And I can change the attribute can shoot to 0, false. So as soon as I shoot, can shoot becomes 0, and I can't shoot again immediately. And then when does this change back to 1? When the bullet is destroyed. So in addition to destroying the bullet, and here's where order of operations becomes important, right before the bullet destroys itself, it's going to change the game level attribute can shoot back to 1. And then it destroys itself. Now, if a bullet misses the bad guy and thereby is not destroyed, it's going to go off infinitely into space and will continue existing forever. So we need another means for destroying it. One way is to use, and this is the way we looked at it in class, is to use a timer and say every bullet has a limited lifespan of, say, 2 seconds. And after 2 seconds, I'm going to option click and drag. After 2 seconds, it restores can shoot to 1 and destroys itself. And 2 seconds is long enough for it to get off of the screen. Now, but wait, what's happening? We've made this can shoot behavior, and yet I can still shoot as much as I want. What's up with that? Well, we've created the attribute, but we're not actually using the attribute. It's changing can shoot from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 0, but nothing is looking at that attribute to have some real effect in the game. And who needs to look at it? The good guy. Because the good guy is just shooting every time the space key is pressed and totally ignoring the can shoot attribute. So here, inside the rule, we can now use this when all conditions are valid. Not only do we press the space bar, but also the attribute can shoot is true. So when all of these conditions are valid, we're pressing the space bar and can shoot is true. Now I can't shoot again until the bullet is destroyed, making the game much, much more challenging. Now every shot really counts. And in fact, it's probably too challenging. Yes, I'm dead and I only got 10 points. So let's go a little bit further than we went in class and see if we can do something where, for instance, 3 bullets can exist at the same time on the screen. So right now only 1 bullet can exist, and we have a can shoot variable that allows us to stop the good guy from shooting unless can shoot is true. So moving forward this idea, how would we allow 3 bullets to be on the screen at the same time? Well, we'd need to count them, and that would be cause for yet another game level attribute. We'd call it, it'd be an integer, bullet count. At the beginning of the game, bullet count is 0. And every time our good guy shoots, we spawn the bullet actor, but we don't change the can shoot attribute to false. We just increment the bullet count. Bullet count is bullet count plus 1. So at the beginning of the game, the bullet count is 0. We shoot once, bullet count becomes 1. We shoot again, bullet count becomes 2. We shoot again, bullet count becomes 3. Similarly, when our bullet dies, instead of automatically changing can shoot back to 1, we're just going to decrease the bullet count. Game level attribute bullet count to bullet to game bullet count minus 1. And we have 2 conditions under which bullets are destroyed, so we need to change it in both places. And just to make this clear, and this is often something you're going to want to do, this bullet count is hidden from us, but to make sure it's working, we can add another display text, and let's just display the bullet count on the screen. And I'll put it somewhere else. I'll put it 100 pixels above the score. So now there's our score and there's our bullet count. I shoot, and it's counting the number of bullets that are on the screen, and every time the bullets die, the bullet count goes back down. But it's still not affecting our game. How do we do that? Well, there's 2 different ways we could do it. The simplest way would be to just stop using can shoot entirely and go into our good guy and change this rule. Now, the conditions that need to exist are the space bar is pressed and the bullet count is less than 3. So I can shoot 3, but no more. And then I have to wait for them to die before I can shoot again. 3 bullets on the screen at the same time. So notice that we're not using the can shoot attribute at all anymore. In fact, we can go and just remove it, because we're using the bullet count to control whether or not we can shoot. And the other thing we want to do is we just included that bullet count in game functions just to just as a way of checking our work. We can turn that off. That's just sort of a debugging tool. And now we can shoot 3 bullets, but no more. Which actually makes the game considerably more playable.